What if the worst moment of your life, the moment someone humiliated you in public, put their hands on you, stood over you while you were pregnant on the floor and called you worthless, turned out to be the exact moment their entire world began to fall apart? What if the man who shoved you had no idea that the person sitting in the front row, watching every single second of it, was your husband? And not just any husband. The kind of man whose name makes rooms go quiet. The kind of man whose stillness is more frightening than another man's rage. This is my story. And I need you to stay with me until the end, because what happened after I hit that floor is something I could never have written myself. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching this from. I want to know how far this story is traveling. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do it now. Hit that button, turn on your notifications, because I promise you every story on this channel is built to stay with you. Now, let's get into it. The backstage area of Seoul Fashion Week smelled like hairspray, nerves, and 7 years of my hard work finally breathing the same air that I stood beside the curtain, one hand pressed gently against my belly, watching my models move through their final checks. 7 months pregnant, and I had still hand-stitched the finishing details on 6 of the 12 pieces walking that runway tonight. My team moved around me like a well-practiced dance, adjusting hems, pinning collars, whispering encouragement in a mix of Korean and English and Yoruba that somehow made perfect sense together. This was my show, my collection. My name on the program. I had dreamed about this moment in a one-room apartment in Lagos, stitching by lamplight while my mother slept a few feet away. I had dreamed about it through 4 years of fashion school, through scholarships that barely covered my books, through every professor who smiled at my work a little too carefully, like they were surprised it was good, and it was good. It was better than good. I knew it. My team knew it. The buyers in the front row knew it too, because I had watched them lean forward during the walkthrough earlier that afternoon, their eyes following every silhouette like they couldn't look away. I exhaled slowly, pressed my hand firmer against my belly. 5 minutes, my assistant, Yemi, called from behind me. I nodded. Closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds, an old habit from Lagos. My mother's voice in my head saying, "Settle yourself before you fly." Then I opened them and turned around. And my blood turned to ice. He was walking toward me with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Tall, well-dressed in a suit that was slightly too expensive for a man with his current bank account. His arm looped around a woman whose expression said she owned every room she walked into. Kofi.myx. The man who had called my pregnancy inconvenient. The man who had signed my studio away while I was at a prenatal appointment. He stopped 3 feet from me, looked me up and down slowly, and smiled. "Zara." He said my name like it was a joke. "Still doing this little project, I see." I didn't speak. Every word I owned had dropped somewhere beneath my feet. "You look." He tilted his head, eyes dropping to my belly with something that turned my stomach, desperate. The woman beside him laughed softly. Short and sharp, like a paper cut. "Kofi." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "You need to leave. This is my show." "Actually," he said, reaching into his jacket and producing a laminated backstage pass, "it's a sponsored event. And my fiancé's family is one of the sponsors." He glanced around slowly, making sure the people nearby could hear. "So technically, I have just as much right to be here as you do." His fiancée, I would learn her name was Clara, tilted her chin at me in a way that was not quite a greeting and not quite a dismissal, but sat somewhere ugly between the two. "You should go sit down," Kofi continued. "Honestly, Zara. A pregnant woman trying to run a fashion show." He shook his head, the same slow, theatrical disappointment I had spent 2 years mistaking for concern. "This is embarrassing." "Leave," I said again. Firm this time. He stepped closer. Too close. The kind of close that was designed to make me step back, to remind me of every time I had made myself smaller to give him more room. I didn't step back. So he put his hand on my shoulder. Not a grab. Not exactly, but a push. Dismissive. Like I was furniture in his way. I stumbled. My heel caught the edge of an equipment case behind me. My arm swung out. I tried to catch myself, but the momentum was already going and there was nothing to grab, and I went down hard, landing on my side, my hands flying to my belly before I even registered the pain shooting through my hip. The room went silent. Not gradually. Instantly. I lay on the floor, and for one terrible second, all I could do was breathe and listen to my baby move. 2 small kicks, like a question, and I whispered into the noise of my own panic. We're okay, we're okay, we're okay. Kofi didn't reach down. He didn't apologize. He stood over me with his foot raised slightly, not a kick, but the threat of one, close enough that the intention sat in the air like smoke. Still pathetic, he said quietly. Some things never change. Yemi screamed his name from across the room. Someone else was already pulling out a phone, and from the gap in the curtain that led to the main runway, I heard footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate, stop completely. I didn't need to see his face to know Jihan had arrived. I need to take you back, because none of what happened that night makes sense without the years that build it. I grew up in Suralur, Lagos, in a house where the sewing machine ran from 6 in the morning until my mother's hands gave out at night. She made clothes for women in the neighborhood, church dresses, also a bee for weddings, school uniforms with careful hems that lasted 3 children before they wore out. She never called what she did art. She called it work. But I watched her hands and I knew the difference. By the time I was 12, I was cutting patterns. By 15, I was designing them. By 18, I had a portfolio that my secondary school art teacher called startling, which I later understood was his careful way of saying he hadn't expected it from me. I applied to every fashion program I could find that offered international scholarships. I got rejected 11 times. The 12th application, a 3-year design residency based between Lagos and Seoul, sent back a different letter. My mother read it twice before she let herself smile. I arrived in Seoul at 22 with 2 suitcases, a portfolio, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only person in a new country who looks exactly like you. The city was enormous and fast and completely indifferent to my presence, which was actually fine. I didn't need Seoul to welcome me. I needed it to let me work. The residency was based at a design institute in Mapogu. My cohort was 12 students from 9 countries. We were competitive and sleep-deprived, and we ate convenience store ramen at midnight and argued about construction techniques until someone's phone alarm announced morning. I was good. Not in a loud way, in a quiet, consistent way that started turning heads by the end of the first semester. My work had something the other students called texture, not just in the fabrics, but in the feeling. Every piece I made carried something. My supervisor, a Korean woman named Professor Shin who did not give compliments easily, held up one of my final semester pieces and told the class, "This one knows why she's making what she's making." It was the best thing anyone had said to me in years. Kofi found me during my 2nd year at a networking event I almost didn't attend because I had a deadline the following morning. He was Ghanaian British, working in brand development, charming in the specific way that feels like sunshine until you realize it's actually a spotlight designed to make you visible only when it suited him. He told me I was talented. He said it like a gift. I believed him like a fool. For 6 months, I floated through life wrapped in the warm feeling of being chosen. Kofi moved into my apartment, temporarily, he said, until his business deals came through. He had plans. Big plans. Real estate, brand partnerships, investment opportunities that were always just one phone call away from changing everything. I worked double shifts at the studio and came home exhausted and still made dinner because Kofi said my cooking reminded him of home. Then the cracks started showing. Small at first. He criticized the way I organized my workspace, complained that I talked too much about my designs, said my ambitions were unrealistic. When I was selected as the featured student in a major Seoul design showcase, Kofi didn't celebrate. He went quiet for 2 days. Then he said, "It's just a student thing. It doesn't mean anything in the real industry." I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed it and worked harder and smiled less and shrank smaller. His jealousy arrived next. He showed up unannounced at my residency studio, lingered in the corridor watching me through the glass with the expression of a man keeping score. "I just want to know you're safe," he said when I asked why. "You don't know what kind of people are in this industry." I knew exactly what kind of person was in my studio. He was the one eating my food and doubting my talent and watching me through glass like I needed monitoring. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I came home from a 14-hour session to find my things moved to one side of the apartment and Kofi on the couch, not looking up, telling me it wasn't working. That I was holding him back. Holding him back from what? The deals that never materialized? The ambition that existed only in his own retelling. I didn't cry in front of him. I walked out with my bag, sat on a bench 3 streets away, and stayed there until I was ready to keep moving. 1 week later, I found out I was pregnant. I sat in the bathroom of a friend's apartment and stared at that test for a long time. Then I made a decision. I would survive this. I would build a life. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. I just didn't know that survival would lead me to the moment that changed everything, standing in the middle of a Seoul street at midnight, pressing my hands against a stranger's wound, refusing to move until the ambulance came. The night I met Ji-hun, I wasn't thinking about love or fate or second chances. I was thinking about whether the man bleeding in front of me was still breathing. It was a Tuesday in November, cold enough that I could see my own breath. I had just come back from a late session at the studio, my sketchbook under my arm, my mind still half inside a jacket construction problem I hadn't solved yet. I heard the tires first, a screech that didn't match any normal stop, and then the impact, and by the time I reached the street, a car was already disappearing around the corner, and a man was lying face down on the wet road. I didn't think. I ran. My first aid training from a short course I had taken in Lagos 2 years earlier came back in fragments. Check breathing, don't move the spine, pressure on the wound. He was bleeding from his side, soaking through a jacket that cost more than my monthly rent. He was unconscious, but breathing. I pressed my hands against the wound, pulled my scarf off with my teeth, and applied pressure while I screamed for someone to call emergency services. It took 4 minutes for anyone else to come outside. It took 12 minutes for the ambulance. It took 2 minutes for 3 men in dark suits to appear from what seemed like nowhere, surrounding us with an urgency that was not quite panic, more like a very controlled emergency response. One of them looked at me with sharp, assessing eyes and said something rapid in Korean that I didn't catch. "I'm not moving my hands until the ambulance arrives," I told him clearly. He stared at me. Then, slowly, he nodded. In the hospital, after they had taken the man away and a nurse had cleaned the blood from my hands and someone had given me a cup of tea I didn't remember accepting, one of the suited men sat down across from me. "You saved his life," he said, in careful English. I applied pressure to a wound, I said. "The surgeons saved his life." Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite a smile. More like a recalibration. "He will want to thank you," he said. "He doesn't have to. He will anyway." He paused. "My name is Sung-jin. The man you helped tonight is someone who does not forget." I went home. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my clean hands for a long time. 3 days later, a black car was parked outside my building. His name was Ji-hun, and he came to my studio door on a Thursday afternoon holding nothing, no flowers, no gift, no rehearsed speech. Just himself and a directness in his eyes that I had no framework for yet. "I wanted to see where you work," he said. I let him in because I was too surprised to think of a reason not to. He walked through the studio slowly, the way someone moves when they are actually looking, not performing interest, but genuinely taking things in. He stopped at a half-finished coat hanging on the dress form near the window. The fabric was a deep rust orange, Lagos cotton with a Korean-inspired collar structure that I had been fighting with for 2 weeks. "This is unfinished," he said. "Everything good usually is," I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. And I felt something shift in the room that I wasn't ready to name. He didn't stay long that first time. He asked me 3 questions: what I was working toward, what I missed about home, and whether I had eaten today. I answered the first 2 carefully and laughed at the third, because it was so unexpectedly practical that it cut through every wall I had built around myself in 2 years of being alone in a foreign city. Over the following weeks, Ji-hun reappeared the way important things often do, gradually, then undeniably. He never arrived unannounced after that first visit. He always asked. He sent a message first. He waited for my answer before coming, and if I said I was busy, he said another time without any shadow of pressure behind it. I found out, 3 months later, entirely by accident, through a financial document buried in a partnership contract, that the anonymous donor who had funded my first independent soul collection was a holding company registered to Ji-hun's family. I called him immediately. "You funded my collection," I said. "I gave money to a designer whose work deserved resources," he said calmly. "Those are different things." "Ji-hun, you gave me my life," he said, quieter now. "I gave you a runway. That still doesn't make us even." I stood in my studio with the phone against my ear and the rust orange coat finally finished on its hanger behind me, and I understood, for the first time, that this man was going to matter to me in a way I was not going to be able to undo. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But before I could fully settle into what was growing between us, I discovered that someone else had been paying attention to my rising name, and she was not paying it as a compliment. Clara Yoon had a face that magazines loved and a heart that operated entirely on strategy. She was the only daughter of the Yoon Group, a Korean-French luxury conglomerate with its fingers in fashion, real estate, media, and several other industries that weren't listed on their public portfolio. She was 29, exquisitely dressed at all times, and had a particular talent for destruction that looked, from a distance, like normal business competition. I first appeared on her radar about 8 months into my independent brand's growth. My second collection had been reviewed in 3 international fashion publications. One of them used the phrase, "a voice the industry didn't know it was waiting for." It was exactly the kind of attention Clara had spent years positioning herself to receive. She started quietly. "A comment here and there in industry circles. Zara's work is interesting, of course, but very derivative, don't you think?" Then, slightly louder, a tip passed to a fashion blog suggesting that 2 pieces from my third collection bore suspicious similarity to concepts from a Yoon Group subsidiary's unpublished mood board. The plagiarism story ran on a Thursday. By Friday morning, 2 buyers who had been in final conversations with me had quietly withdrawn. I sat in my studio that Friday afternoon and felt the ground shift under me in a way I recognized from before. Ji-hun called at 6 p.m. "I know about the article," I said before he could speak. "So do I," he said. "I've known since this morning." "What do you know?" A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. Everything. The source, the motive, and exactly how to dismantle it. But not yet. Let the board see the full picture first. I didn't fully understand what he meant that night. I would later. Ji-hun proposed on a Sunday evening in my studio, not in the grand way I had always half-imagined proposals existed, no restaurant, No ring hidden in a dessert, no audience. Just us and honesty, and the rust orange coat finally hanging finished in the collection along the wall. He sat across from me at my work table and said, "I need to tell you everything before I ask you anything." And he did. He told me about his family, the Song family, one of the oldest and most powerful networks in Seoul, operating across legitimate business and spaces where, as he said quietly, legality becomes a matter of interpretation. He told me about the protection his name carried and the danger that sometimes walked alongside it. He told me about enemies, about loyalty, about what loving him would ask of me. He did not romanticize any of it. When he finished, he looked at me steadily and said, "I am asking you to choose this with your eyes fully open. If you say no, I will still keep you safe. Your answer doesn't change that." I was quiet for a long time. I thought about Lagos, about 2 suitcases and a scholarship and 11 rejection letters before the one that changed everything. I thought about Kofi, who had loved me conditionally, available when I was useful, absent when I was not. I thought about what it felt like to be chosen with fine print versus being chosen completely. I said, "I've been walking through this city for 3 years trying to build something real. You're the most real thing that has happened to me here." He waited. "Yes," I said. We married 3 weeks later, small, intentional, beautiful. I designed my own dress, deep green silk with a wrapped silhouette and Lagos lace at the cuffs. Jihan wore a traditional hanbok in dark navy. We exchanged vows in Korean and English and Yoruba, a sentence in each language, and when Yemi cried in the front row, I felt something settle inside me that had been unsteady for years. Nobody from my old life knew. Not Kofi. Not Clara. We didn't tell them. We didn't need to. The pregnancy arrived like a plot twist I hadn't written but immediately knew belonged in the story. I found out on a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days before the Seoul Fashion Week submission deadline. I sat on the bathroom floor for 11 minutes, staring at the test, doing the very specific mental arithmetic of a woman trying to calculate whether joy and ambition can occupy the same space at the same time. Jihan came home to find me still sitting at my work table at midnight, surrounded by fabric swatches and structural sketches, a cup of tea gone cold beside me. He sat down across from me. "I'm thinking about withdrawing from the show," I said. "Why?" "Because I'm pregnant and I have 14 days in." "And you've been building toward the show for 2 years," he said gently. "So have your team. So has every piece in this collection." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Show them what you're building." "All of it." I looked at him. "The collection and the baby," he said simply. I went back to work. The following 12 days were the most demanding of my career. I was nauseous in the mornings and exhausted by afternoon, but the work had a clarity to it that I hadn't expected, like the pregnancy had stripped away every creative hesitation and left only what was essential. Every piece felt true in a way that my earlier work, for all its technical skill, sometimes hadn't. What I didn't know was that while I was building, Clara was doing the opposite. Jihan told me later that Kofi had approached the Yoon Group 6 weeks before the show, offering his connections in exchange for a sponsorship that included backstage access to Fashion Week. Clara's father had agreed, finding Kofi useful as a contact without particularly respecting him as a person. Kofi had seen my name on the show's official designer list. He had requested the backstage access specifically. Neither of them imagined, not even briefly, that anything stood between them and whatever they planned to do with it. The morning of the show, I arrived at the venue at 6:30. The venue was a converted warehouse in Seongsu-dong that the organizing committee had transformed into something extraordinary: clean white walls, runway lighting that turned everything golden, tiered seating that curved around the catwalk like an embrace. Outside, the September morning was cool and bright. Inside, my team was already moving. Yemi met me at the door with a coffee and a look that said she had already handled 3 separate crises, and it wasn't yet 7. I walked through the collection for the final time, 12 pieces, each one numbered and tagged and assigned to a model who had rehearsed until the walk felt natural. The collection told a story. It opened with structure and restraint, Legos geometries meeting soul precision, and moved gradually towards something freer, fabrics that moved like water, colors that shifted from earth to sky. My head model, Era, caught my eye as I passed and gave me a slow, certain nod. We're ready. I checked my phone. Jihan had texted at 6:45, front row. Already here. Go be brilliant. I smiled. At 9 o'clock, the venue began filling. Buyers, editors, photographers, industry contacts, sponsors. The energy built steadily, the way it always does before something real is about to happen. At 9:20, Clara arrived immaculate in pale gray, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed the event existed around her. A man walked behind her, one hand in his pocket, his face wearing the expression of someone performing casualness. Kofi. I watched him scan the room. I watched his eyes find me. He smiled slowly, the same smile from all those old memories, the one that had taken me 2 years to understand was not warmth, but ownership. He began walking toward me. Yemi saw it and started moving from the other direction. She wasn't fast enough. Everything I am about to describe happened in less than 4 minutes. But it exists in my memory in the kind of slow, stretched time that only real crisis produces. Kofi reached me backstage. Clara 2 steps behind him, watching with the careful attention of someone who had planned this moment and wanted to see it land correctly. He looked at my belly first, then at my face. Then, deliberately, around the backstage space, at my team, at my collection, at everything I had built, with an expression that communicated, without a single word, that he found all of it amusing. You really went ahead with it, he said. This is not the time, Kofi. I heard the reviews from the walkthrough. He tilted his head. Generous. People here are very polite to newcomers. I felt my team go still behind me. Leave, I said. Or what? He stepped closer. You'll call security? I have a sponsor pass. He glanced down at my belly again. Is it his? Some Korean man who felt sorry for you? Classic Zara, always finding a new person to carry you. Don't, I said quietly. You always needed someone to carry you. I used to think it was insecurity. Now I think it's just who you are. He put his hand on my shoulder, flat, dismissive, the way you move something that is in your way. I stumbled backward. My heel caught the edge of an equipment case. I grabbed for nothing, found nothing, and went down sideways onto the floor. The impact hit my hip hard. My hands moved to my belly before anything else, before the pain registered, before I took a breath, before I did anything that was about me. My baby kicked. Once. Twice. Okay, I thought. Okay, you're okay. The room was silent. Completely silent. Kofi stood over me. He didn't reach down. He didn't step back. He raised his foot slightly, not a kick, but the architecture of one, and looked at me on the floor with something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite regret. Something worse than both. This is what happens when you think you're more than you are, he said. Yemi made a sound across the room. One of my models said something sharp in Yoruba. And then, from the gap in the backstage curtain, footsteps stopped. I knew without turning. I had learned the sound of his stillness. Jihan had been sitting in the front row, 3 meters away, for the last 45 minutes. He had heard everything. Jihan did not run. That was the thing I would remember later, when I tried to explain to Yemi what it felt like to watch it happen. He didn't shout, didn't charge forward, didn't do any of the things that in films mark the moment when a man is angry. He walked. Slowly. Deliberately. The way a person moves when they are not afraid of what is waiting for them at the other end. He came through the backstage curtain and the room reorganized itself around his presence without anyone consciously deciding to move. It was the way people respond to a certain kind of authority, not because they were told to, but because something in the air changed and their bodies understood the change before their minds caught up. 3 men in dark suits appeared at the perimeter of the room. Sung Jin moved from near the exit to a position that quietly and completely blocked it. Kofi was still looking down at me. Ji-hun passed him. He passed him without acknowledgement, without a glance, the way you walk past something that doesn't require your attention yet, and came directly to me. He knelt on the floor beside me. His hands hovered at my arms without touching, asking, always asking, even now. Are you hurt? His voice was low, controlled, steady. My hip. I'm okay. I pressed my hand to my belly. The baby moved. We're okay. His jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly through his nose, one measured breath that I recognized as the thing he did when he was managing something very large very quietly. He helped me to my feet. Carefully. Deliberately. Both hands, my pace not his eyes on my face the whole time. He waited until I was standing, until he was certain I was steady. Then, and only then, he turned around. The room had gone so quiet that I could hear the sound system in the main runway area playing its pre-show ambient track through the walls. Ji-hun looked at Kofi. Kofi looked back. And I watched with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had spent 2 years doubting herself as the color drained slowly and completely from Kofi's face. He didn't know the name yet, but he knew the room. He knew that every person in it had just chosen a side, and none of them had chosen him. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward through the room in a way that was almost visible. A photographer near the curtain leaned toward the woman beside her and said 2 words. The woman's eyes went wide. She stepped back from Clara without making it obvious she was stepping back. A senior buyer near the equipment racks reached for his phone. Clara's own PR manager, a sharp-featured woman in a camel blazer who had been standing 3 steps behind Clara, looked at her phone screen, looked at Ji-hun, and took 2 slow, quiet steps sideways until she was no longer directly associated with Clara's position in the room. Clara noticed. She looked around. Read the room with the quick, practiced intelligence of someone who had spent years navigating social power. And for the first time since she had walked into this building, something uncertain moved across her face. Kofi still didn't fully understand. He was still performing bravado, still wearing the expression of a man who believes that volume can substitute for authority. I don't know who you think you are, Kofi said, but this is a private issue between me and... There is no issue between you and my wife, Ji-hun said. The word landed. Wife. Kofi's performance stopped. Completely. Like a power cut. He looked at me. He looked at Ji-hun. He looked at the ring I had been wearing for 7 months that he had never once had the occasion to see. He stopped. Started again. She's your. The first true thing you've said today, Ji-hun replied, is that you didn't know. Clara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her father. She didn't answer. It rang again. Ji-hun didn't raise his voice once. That was the thing Kofi couldn't seem to process, the absence of anger in the traditional sense, the way Ji-hun stood in front of him with absolute calm and somehow made that calm feel more dangerous than any shouting could have been. He guided Kofi to a quieter corner of the backstage space, not privately, not hidden from view, but away from the center of the room. 2 of Ji-hun's men stood at a respectful but communicative distance. I stayed near my team. Yemi stood beside me with her hand on my arm, not speaking, just present. Ji-hun spoke in a low, even voice. I was close enough to hear. The studio, he said. The intellectual property. The 3 contracts you redirected through a holding company registered in Clara Yoon's name while Zara was attending prenatal appointments. He paused. The pregnancy you called inconvenient to 2 separate industry contacts who repeated it to people I trust. Kofi's mouth opened. Closed. I want you to understand that I have known about each of these things for some time, Ji-hun continued. I waited. I needed the documentation to be complete. It is now complete. Kofi's voice was unsteady. That's business. That's how the industry works. What you did was theft. What you said was cruelty. Those are different from business. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a document on the equipment case beside Kofi. This returns the studio, the creative rights, and the contractual equity to Zara. It has been prepared by my legal team and reviewed by 3 independent attorneys. You will sign it today. Kofi stared at the document. Stared at Ji-hun. I watched him search, the way a man searches when he is suddenly aware that every exit has been quietly and professionally covered. And if I don't, he tried. Ji-hun tilted his head very slightly. Then we proceed in a way that is significantly less comfortable for you. I am offering you a simple transaction. Your signature in exchange for handling this quietly. He paused. I am being generous. I want you to understand that. Kofi's hand was shaking when he picked up the pen. While Kofi was signing, Clara was unraveling. Not visibly, she was too trained for that. On the outside, she was still composed, still correct in her pale gray outfit, still holding herself with the posture of a woman who has never publicly lost anything. But Ji-hun's legal team had been moving for 40 minutes. I learned the full detail later, piecing it together from what Ji-hun told me and what Sung-jin's report contained. But the outline was this. For 2 years, a subsidiary of the Yoon Group had been operating a quiet design acquisition program, sourcing independent designers' concept work through third-party scouts and incorporating those concepts, with minor adjustments, into mainline Yoon collections. My designs had appeared in this pipeline 3 separate times. Timestamps existed. The original files existed. The acquisition records existed. Ji-hun had been building the file since month 4 of our relationship, when Sung-jin had first flagged the Yoon Group's interest in my work as something other than legitimate competition. He had waited for the moment when the evidence was irrefutable and the audience was maximally consequential. That moment was now. The show's official live stream, still running, had been recording for 53 minutes. It had caught Kofi's approach. The shove. The fall. The silence. Ji-hun's walk across the room. Not all of it was clearly audible, but enough. Enough for the fashion industry's internal networks to begin circulating the footage before the show even started. Clara's phone rang a 3rd time. This time, she answered. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. She went very still. Her PR manager, who had fully completed her quiet retreat and was now standing near the exit, watched Clara's face and made a private decision that this was the appropriate moment to leave the building entirely. Clara looked across the room at Ji-hun. He did not look back. 5 minutes before showtime, I made a decision. My hip ached. My hands were still slightly unsteady. Yemi was looking at me with the expression of someone who would support whatever I chose and also personally preferred that I chose to sit down. I stood in the backstage space and looked at my collection, 12 pieces, 2 years, every late night and early morning and difficult season of my life present in the fabric and the structure and the detail. I pressed my hand against my belly. My baby moved a slow, rolling shift, like a question and an answer at the same time. We show, I said. Yemi let out a long breath. Then she turned to the team. Final positions. 2 minutes. The energy shifted. My team moved back into their rhythm, the professional, practiced focus of people who have prepared too well to let anything stop them. Era caught my eye from her position at the head of the line and gave me the same slow, certain nod as before. We're ready. We've always been ready. The first note of the show soundtrack came through the floor as a vibration. Then I walked to the backstage monitor and watched my collection walk. It was extraordinary. Not because it was perfect, there was a slight adjustment issue with the fifth piece that a sharp eye might catch. But it moved with the kind of life that only honest work carries. The audience leaned forward. I watched it on the monitor in real time, the bodies shifting, the phones coming up, the quiet that falls over a room when it is genuinely being held by something. Era closed the show in the final piece, the rust orange coat, fully realized, Legos, cotton, and soul structure, and 2 years of my life in every seam. The applause began before she reached the end of the runway. From somewhere in the front row, I heard Ji-hun begin it. I stood backstage with my hand on my belly and tears running down my face, and I did not try to stop them. They were the good kind, the kind that come when you have survived something difficult and arrived somewhere true. My phone lit up on the equipment case beside me. The live stream viewer count was climbing fast. I was still backstage, accepting congratulations from my team, when Yemi appeared at my elbow with her phone screen facing me. "It's everywhere," she said. The video had been posted by 3 separate accounts within the first 20 minutes of the show. The clearest one, taken by a buyer near the backstage entrance, showed the full sequence: Kofi's approach, the shove, my fall, my hands going to my belly, the silence, Ji-hun rising from the front row and walking across the room. It didn't show everything that happened after. It didn't need to. The caption on the version gaining the most traction read, "She fell, she got up, she walked her show. And her husband runs Seoul." The comments were moving too fast to read individually. By the time the show officially concluded 40 minutes after the incident, the clip had been reshared by 6 fashion journalists, 2 international buyers, and a Korean entertainment account with 2 million followers. The narrative had flipped. Completely and permanently. Zara, the foreign designer with the stolen studio and the plagiarism accusation against her name, was now Zara, the woman who fell at Seoul Fashion Week and got up and walked her show. The woman whose husband was who he was. The woman who had been quietly building something real while people with more money and less talent tried to take it apart. The plagiarism accusations against me dissolved into the background within hours, replaced by questions about the Yoon Group's acquisition practices. Kofi's name was attached to the shove footage. His business contacts started calling him. None of those calls were supportive. Across the room, Clara was standing alone near the venue exit, her phone in her hand, her PR manager gone, her fiancé's document signed, her father's number on her screen, and no version of this evening that made her look good available to her. Clara's father called again. This time she answered. The conversation was brief. Chairman Yoon was not calling to offer sympathy or defense. He was calling to instruct. Settle. Quietly. Immediately. Clara had built the plagiarism operation with enough distance between herself and the evidence that she believed she was protected. She was not. Ji-hun's documentation had traced the acquisition chain directly to her office. The junior designer who had been pressured into sourcing my work and had refused, and had been dismissed for it, had kept records. Clara told her father she needed time. Her father told her she had until morning. She refused. She had not spent her entire career being managed by men, and she was not going to fold on the first night. She was genuinely threatened. It was the wrong decision. What she didn't know is that Ji-hun had not acted fully yet. He had allowed the evening to unfold, had handled Kofi, had let the video circulate. But the formal legal mechanism, the full filing, the industry body notification, the complete evidence package had not yet been triggered. He was waiting for her to choose. If she settled, she could control the terms. If she didn't, Jihan would choose them for her. Clara told her father she needed to think. Her father ended the call. She stood in the corridor alone, for the first time in years with no audience to perform composure for, and understood that she had walked into this evening believing she held every advantage. She had been wrong about every single one. The document Kofi signed that evening was 12 pages long. It returned my studio lease, which he had transferred to a Yoon Group subsidiary 9 months earlier without my knowledge, using a clause in our old joint business registration that I had signed without adequate legal review. It returned the intellectual property rights to my first 3 collections, which had been registered under a holding company in his name. It returned the proceeds from 2 licensing agreements that I had never known existed, pieces from my second collection that had been sold for commercial use in a campaign I'd never seen. I sat in Jihan's car afterward with the signed copy in my lap and read through it twice. I didn't know about the licensing agreements, I said. I know, Jihan said. That's why I made sure they were included. I looked out the window at Seoul moving past in the dark. How long have you known all of this? I asked. Most of it for about 8 months. The final piece, the licensing records, came through 6 weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a moment. Because I wanted to give it back to you, not hand you a list of what had been taken. There's a difference. I turned to look at him. You would have spent those 8 months carrying it, he said. The anger, the grief. I wanted you to use those months building instead. I understood why he had done it the way he did. Not to control, to protect. And I was learning, slowly, the difference. Kofi left Seoul that night. His investors had already begun withdrawing. His access to the Yoon Group network was frozen. He was returned, precisely and without drama, to the version of himself that existed before he borrowed other people's power. He did not contact me. He knew better now. 3 days after the show, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, as if she had been expecting me, as if she had been sitting near the phone. Sarah. Just my name. But she said it with all the weight of everything she had put into me, the late nights, the sacrifices, the careful hands that had taught my hands what to do. I told her everything. The show, the fall, Kofi, Jihan. The document, the video, the way the room had changed. She listened without interrupting. That was her way. She let you finish before she spoke, because she believed the full story deserved to be told before anyone offered a response to it. When I finished, there was a silence. Then, that coat you made. The orange one. Is that in the collection they saw? Yes. Another silence. Then, quietly, I taught you to finish the hem before you showed anyone the garment. You always remembered that. I started crying. Not the broken crying of before, not the crying I had done after Kofi. The other kind. The kind that comes when you have carried something very heavy for a very long time, and someone who loves you sees that you have been carrying it, and it becomes, briefly, shareable. Jihan, she said eventually. Tell me about him. I told her. All of it this time, not the careful version, but the real one. The hospital. The studio. The proposal. The hanbok. The vows in 3 languages. She was quiet again when I finished. Is he good to you? Yes. Does he make you smaller? No. He makes more room. I heard her exhale, long and slow and satisfied. Then I'm coming, she said. She booked her flight that evening. Lagos to Seoul, departing Friday. My mother arrived with 1 large suitcase, a bag of Nigerian foodstuffs that customs nearly intercepted, and the calm, appraising energy of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and needed to evaluate the man she had raised her for. Jihan met us at the airport. My mother looked at him for a long moment when I introduced them. Not rudely, carefully. The way she looked at fabric, she was considering for a serious commission. She said, I heard you were there that night. Yes, Jihan said. What did you do? I made sure she could walk her show. My mother nodded slowly, as if this were the correct answer to an exam question she had prepared. Then she picked up her own suitcase, refusing Jihan's hand when he reached for it, and walked toward the exit. Jihan looked at me. I smiled. That was well, I said. She picked up her own bag. That means she respects you. That evening, Jihan's mother hosted a quiet dinner at the family home. The two women occupied opposite ends of a table and navigated each other with the particular focused politeness of people who are both accustomed to being the most important woman in a room and have temporarily agreed to share the designation. Then my mother, halfway through the meal, put down her chopsticks and looked at Jihan's mother directly and said, "Your son, does he know how to be wrong?" A pause. Jihan's mother said, carefully, "He has learned." My mother nodded. Good. Zara has also learned. They can be wrong together. Something in Jihan's mother's expression shifted, a relaxation so small that only another woman would have caught it. But I caught it. Later, helping clear the table, I found the two of them in the kitchen, not speaking, but working alongside each other with the quiet efficiency of women who understand that some conversations happen better through action than words. The interview request came from a Seoul-based fashion magazine with international distribution, the same one that had used the phrase, "a voice the industry didn't know it was waiting for." Jihan and I talked about it that evening on the balcony. The city spread out below us. Nara, I was already calling the baby by name in my mind, moving steadily inside me. "It's your story," he said. "Your work, your name, your experience. I can't make this call. Would it affect you? Your family?" He considered this honestly. "Exposure is always a factor. But I won't use that as a reason to silence you. That's not how we operate. I did the interview alone. I told the truth. I described the plagiarism clearly, the acquisitions, the timeline, the effect on my contracts. I described the shove. I described getting up. I talked about my collection and what it meant and where it came from. I talked about Jihan without making him my rescue. He didn't save me. He made sure I didn't have to keep surviving alone. Those are different things." The interviewer asked if I had anything to say to people who had doubted me. I thought about it. "I made the coat anyway," I said finally. "The orange one." I was fighting with the collar for 2 weeks and I kept going back to it and I finished it. That's my answer. The interview published on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Clara's legal team had sent a cease and desist letter to the magazine. By Thursday evening, Jihan's legal team had filed a response that made the cease and desist look like a polite suggestion. Clara's mistake, one of several, but this one was the most public, was believing that the cease and desist would intimidate the magazine into pulling the interview. It didn't. It had the opposite effect. The magazine's editor published a brief statement. They stood by the interview. They stood by the facts as stated, and they would be cooperating fully with any legitimate legal process. The statement included a line noting that the interview had been reviewed by legal counsel prior to publication. The cease and desist became its own story. Fashion industry legal analysts began examining the letter publicly, dissecting its language, identifying its weaknesses, noting that several of its claims were directed at factual statements with documented support. Two analysts noted that sending a cease and desist to suppress a factual account of an ongoing legal matter was not a strong legal strategy. It suggested, one wrote, either poor counsel or significant panic. Clara was experiencing both. Jihan's full legal filing, the complete evidence package he had been building for 8 months, was submitted to the fashion industry's governing body the morning after the cease and desist. It included the acquisition records, the timestamp comparisons, the financial trail connecting the acquisitions to Clara's direct office, and an affidavit from 3 independent design experts confirming the originality of my work. And then, quietly, the former junior designer Clara had fired for refusing to participate in the acquisition program reached out to Yemi. Her name was Mafia. She had kept everything. She met me for coffee on a Saturday morning, a folder on the table between us, her hands steady, her expression that of someone who had been waiting a long time to do the right thing and was relieved to finally do it. "I should have come forward sooner," she said. "You're here now," I said. She slid the folder across the table. Minasio's records were meticulous. She had kept copies of everything, the internal emails instructing her to source independent designers' concept work, the mood boards she had been shown with my pieces already embedded and attributed to unnamed external inspiration, the messages she had sent to her supervisor objecting to the process, and the termination notice she had received 14 days later with the stated reason, creative differences. She had kept them not because she expected to use them. She told me she had spent 18 months trying to decide what the right thing to do was, but because, as she said quietly over coffee, I knew it was wrong. And I didn't want to be the kind of person who forgets that. I reached across the table and covered her hand briefly. "You're not." Her testimony was added to the evidence package. Jihan's legal team filed the supplementary affidavit within 48 hours. The fashion industry's governing body announced a formal investigation into the Yoon Group's design acquisition practices 3 days later. The announcement was careful and procedural, but the industry understood what it meant. I watched it unfold from my studio, where I was beginning sketches for the next collection, Nara moving inside me with increasing confidence, as if she too was impatient to see how things resolved. Minasio's story went into the interview as an addendum, published a week after the original piece. The headline was simple: "The Designer Who Refused to Steal." It was Minasio's headline. She had earned it. The comment sections filled with other designers, small, independent, international, sharing similar experiences. The conversation was becoming something larger than me, larger than my studio, larger than one shove at one fashion show. It was becoming the conversation the industry had been avoiding for years. Jihan read the addendum piece at breakfast and said nothing for a long moment. "Then, you did that. Minacio did that. You made it safe enough for her to come forward," he said. "That matters." Our daughter arrived 3 weeks early, on a Thursday morning, in the same hospital where Jihan had first opened his eyes and looked at me 4 years earlier. I had been awake since 2 in the morning, certain and then uncertain and then certain again, Jihan calm and methodical beside me, his overnight bag already packed. He had repacked it 3 times in the last 2 weeks, each time quietly, without mentioning it. The labor was 14 hours. Difficult and extraordinary, and the most consuming experience of my life. Jihan stayed beside me every moment, holding my hand, tracking the monitor readings, talking quietly in both our languages, giving me something steady to orient against when the pain made everything else blurry. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Nara arrived. She was loud immediately. Loudly, emphatically, magnificently present. Jihan held her first, and his face, controlled and composed through every boardroom and confrontation and quiet danger I had ever watched him navigate, broke open completely. No performance, no management. Just a man holding his daughter for the first time, crying without any attempt to stop it. "She's perfect," he said. "She's loud," I said. "She gets that from her mother," he said, and I laughed even though I was exhausted and overwhelmed and more full of feeling than I had ever been in my life. Jihan's phone lit up on the bedside table. A message from Sungjin, settlement confirmed. Full terms agreed. Announcement tomorrow. He showed me the screen. I looked at it. Then at Nara. Then back at him. "Tell me tomorrow," I said. "Tonight is hers." He put the phone face down and didn't look at it again. The settlement was announced on a Friday morning while I was home with Nara, learning the geography of new motherhood, the weight of her against my chest, the rhythm of her breathing. The specific silence of a sleeping infant that is not actually silence at all, but the loudest thing I had ever heard. Jihan read me the terms over breakfast. The Yoon Group formally acknowledged that 3 of my original designs had been incorporated into Yoon's subsidiary collections without attribution or compensation. They issued a public statement crediting my work. The relevant collections were pulled from their commercial catalog. Financial damages were paid, an amount that Jihan described as appropriate, and that Yemi, when I told her later, described with a word I won't write here, but that accurately conveyed its scale. Minacio was reinstated, not to the Yoon Group, which she did not want, but to a position at a reputable independent house that Jihan's network had quietly identified as a good fit. She sent me a message that morning. Thank you for making it matter. Clara stepped down from her executive role at the Yoon Group within the week. Officially, the statement cited a mutual decision to restructure leadership in response to the investigation. The industry read it correctly. Her father's statement was brief and surgical, acknowledging the settlement, accepting responsibility at the institutional level, and containing not a single word that expressed anything other than strategic damage control. Clara was not mentioned by name. I read the statement once, put it down, and did not think about Clara again with any significant frequency after that. She had taken up too much of my mental space already. Kofi sent one message, 3 days after the settlement. It was short. Congratulations on the show. Glad things worked out. I read it. I showed it to Jihan. He raised an eyebrow. I deleted it without responding. A Paris fashion house, one whose name I had written in my sketchbook at 22, next to a margin note that said one day, reached out to Yemi that afternoon, requesting a meeting about an exclusive first look at my next collection. Yemi called me from the other room. Zara, she said, in a voice she was working very hard to keep professional. You need to come read this email. I was feeding Nara. I looked down at my daughter's face, then up at Yemi in the doorway. Read it to me, I said. She did. I closed my eyes, breathed. One day had arrived. 6 months after Nara was born, I stood in the wings of a venue in Paris and felt, for the second time in my life, the specific electricity of a room holding its breath before something real happens. This time I was not 7 months pregnant and fighting to stay upright. I was standing in heels I had broken in over 3 weeks of studio sessions, wearing a dress I had designed and made myself, deep green silk, Lagos lace at the cuffs, exactly like my wedding dress, because I wanted to carry that day onto the stage with me. Nara was in the front row, in Jihan's arms, wearing a tiny version of the rust orange fabric from the coat that had started everything. Yemi had insisted. I had pretended to resist and then agreed immediately. Beside Jihan sat my mother. Beside my mother sat Jihan's mother. The two of them had developed, over 6 months, the particular close friendship of women who do not need to explain themselves to each other, built on shared meals and competing opinions about how to hold a baby correctly and a mutual, unspoken agreement that they had both done good work raising the people who had found each other. The collection was called Crossing, 12 pieces that moved between 2 worlds without apologizing for either, carrying Lagos in their construction and Seoul in their silhouette, and something that was only mine in the space between. Era walked first, the same model who had closed Seoul Fashion Week, now opening Paris with the confidence of a woman who understood exactly what she was carrying. The room went quiet in the way I had learned to recognize, not the polite quiet of courtesy, but the held-breath quiet of genuine attention. I watched from the wings. My hand moved, briefly, to my side, where Nara had kicked twice, 3 months ago, on the floor of a backstage room in Seoul, and I breathed. When Era reached the end of the runway, the applause began. Jihan started it again. I heard his hands first, steady and certain. Then the room. Backstage, after the final walk, he found me in the way he always found me, without urgency, without performance, moving through whatever stood between us until he arrived. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, how does it feel? I thought about Lagos. About 2 suitcases. About 11 rejection letters and the 12th that changed everything. About a hospital corridor and a man bleeding through an expensive suit and the decision to stop. About a studio and a rust-orange coat and a fall on a cold floor and getting up anyway. About a daughter in the front row, wearing the color that built her mother's future, held in the arms of a man who had made more room for me rather than less. Like I built something they couldn't tear down, I said. He took my hand. We walked back out together. The past will always exist. Scars don't disappear just because you survive them. But the past no longer defines my present or dictates my future. I have learned that healing isn't about erasing what hurt you. It's about building something stronger in the spaces where pain used to live. It's about choosing people who water your growth rather than poison your roots. Kofi never returned. Never contacted me again. He became exactly what Jihan promised, a forgotten footnote rather than a defining chapter. And every morning when Jihan kisses my forehead and Nara reaches her small hands toward my face and the city of Seoul breathes outside our window, I allow myself to feel the full weight of what I once thought was impossible. I am loved. I am protected. I am chosen. I am home. I am no longer the woman Kofi dismissed. I am no longer defined by survival alone. I am Zara. Wife. Mother. Designer. Fighter. Beloved. And that all of that, every single piece of it, is everything. And that is where Zara's story ends, or rather, where it truly begins. If this story moved something in you, if you felt every moment of that fall and every step of that rise, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit that button, and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story. Every single video on this channel is crafted with the same care and intention that Zara put into that rust-orange coat, built to last, built to matter, built for you. And before you go, drop your location in the comments. Tell me what city, what country, what corner of the world you are watching from. I want to see how far these stories are traveling. I want to know you are here. New stories drop regularly. Come back. You already know it will be worth it.